Alright, I'd like to start off by saying Barak Yahawah, Ba'ashem Yahawashi, Ba'ashem Rawchaa Qadash. Welcome to another live lesson. The name of this one is, and he exercises all the power of the first beast. And pretty much this is a lesson based off of an article that I ran across. And that's a direct quote. The title is a direct quote from Revelation 13. I believe that's the 12th verse. And pretty much, I just have an article here. I want to read some of it. A little pressed for time right now, but it's all right. Go as long as I can. And then, got to go to camp, of course. This is the Club of Rome, how climate hysteria is being used to create global governance. Well, there it goes right there. And pretty much this is dated Saturday, May 20th, 2023, which is today. It says, in the early 1970s, the U.S. and much of the Western world was shifting into a stagflationary economic crisis. And it's no coincidence that 1970, once it crossed from 69 to 70, there were a lot of things that happened at that time. 1969 was a very pivotal year for the truth, and for prophecy. All right, it says in the early that Nixon removed the dollar completely from the gold standard in 1971 with the aid of the Federal Reserve, or perhaps under the direction of the Fed. It was under the direction of the Fed. He wasn't running nothing but his mouth, which ultimately escalated inflation pressures, right? Because at one point everything was stagnant, it wasn't moving, So it says Europe's post-war boom came to an abrupt end, while prices on goods and oil, gasoline in the U.S. skyrocketed up until 1981 and 1982. Right, it says when the Federal Reserve jacked interest rates up to around 20% and created a deliberate recessionary crash. And this is what it is. They have a plan, and the plan is set up to basically destroy the economies of the world, to introduce the New World Order, which is based off of a economic system, all right, which would be introducing the MOTB, which is their technology, which is the so-called micro CHIP. Interestingly, the IMF had created the SDR system in 1969, just before the gold standard was cut. The same SDR which the IMF is poised to use as the foundation of a global digital currency mechanism, because it's going to be a worldwide thing. And the World Economic Forum was founded when? In 1971. Now, notice how these dates add up to the time when Esau started falling, where the scriptures say, we would have healed Babylon, but she is not healed. Take balm for her pain, see if she may be healed. There's no stimulus or nothing that can help the economy of America or help America get back to its so-called prominence, because prophecy states that this place would go down, financially, morally, so on and so forth. So we're witnessing that right now. And it's no coincidence that around this time, 68, 69, 70, 71, all of these things were taking place. It says the time period, by the way, the beginning of the article, which I forgot to mention, is the Club of Rome, how climate hysteria is being used to create global governance. And that's a key, and that's what brought to mind, the scripture, in Revelation about he exercises all the power of the first beast, because Rome was the first beast, and America is the revival of the ancient Roman Empire, just in a different time period, under the same rules and regulations. So back to the article, it says the time period is often depicted in films as a happy-go-lucky era of disco, drugs, hippies, and rock and roll. And that's what they promoted. Why? Because at this time, when they were imploding and destroying the economy, they had people drugged up. They had people, partying in that party mode. You know, they had this, you know, new form of music outside of rock and roll, and you had the, you know, you had the disco era and all of that. So there was a lot of degenerate things happening which were keeping the people distracted. Basically a bread and circus, you know, a bread and circus event, right? It says, but the reality is that the early 1970s was the beginning of the end of the West, right? So before we read on in the article, let's go to the book of Obadiah. All right. Now, in the book of Obadiah, which is a prophecy directed at Esau, Edom, it speaks about this. When we go to the 3rd verse, it says, the pride of thine heart has deceived thee, thou that dwellest in the clefts of the rock. There's no surprise who are the, you know, cliff dwellers, rock dwellers, cave dwellers, which are the Edomites. This is why they're identified as what? Caucasians. You know, and not all people that look like Caucasians are Edomites. You have different nations that look like that because of the mixing and mingling. You also have Israelites that look like so-called white people, so you could understand. It says, whose habitation is high, right? The high rises. And it's no coincidence that America was the, you know, the beginning, you know, of the skyrocket era, you know, or not skyrocket, the skyscraper era, you know. And the skyscraper era was what? That was when these buildings started to be erected. I forget the year, but the very first skyscraper building was in Chicago. It was, I forgot the exact year, but it was in Chicago. It was 10 stories high, you know. And that was the first, or that was the beginning of the skyscrapers in the world, in America and the world. All right, it says, whose habitation is high, that saith in his heart, who shall bring me down to the ground? Yeah, because they've been in power for so long. They've had this great military and military might and military power. Their blessing is the sword. They took peace with the sword, or took peace away from the earth with their sword, so on and so forth. So they came to the point where they never thought that they will go down, you know. But that's just not the case. It says, though thou exalt thyself as the eagle, and there's no coincidence that you had the space race with Sputnik, and then you had the Apollo missions, and there's no coincidence that in 1969 America announced that it went to the moon, which they never did, but they announced that. And there's no coincidence that that very same year was when the truth was coming out hard and heavy, and the demoralization and the falling of America started to happen. You know, this is prophecy, people. It says, though thou exalt thyself as the eagle, and though thou set thy nest among the stars, which is, that's what they did. You know, when they set up space stations, they set up satellites, you know, they set up, you know, the so-called moon landing, you know, which they had a movie director, Kubrick, Stanley Kubrick, you know, using his set for Odyssey 2001 to film that fake moon landing. It says, though thou set thy nest among the stars, thence will I bring thee down, saith the Lord, Yahawah. So from that point, that's when they began to fall. And it's no coincidence that we read that here, the time, in the back to the article, the time period is often depicted in films as a happy-go-lucky era of disco, drugs, hippies, and rock and roll, which it was. But what it was a distraction to the majority of the people, because the majority of people were into that movement, into that era. They weren't into what was going on in the government and the finance, you know, the economy, none of that stuff. They were into partying, you know, doing drugs, going to these different discotheques and all of that, you know. So it says, but the reality is that the early 1970s was the beginning of the end of the West, because the Lord said that he, appointed his bounds that he could not pass. He gave them a certain time period that they would rule for. And after they ruled for that time period, then they would fall. Right? It says, it was the moment that our economic foundations were sabotaged and the affluence of the middle class was slowly but surely stolen by inflation. And why is that? Because they want no other class but super rich and super poor. And that's the truth, Ruth. So it says, in the midst of the economic malaise, I believe is pronounced, which is ill or bad time. Mal is bad, a disease. It says, which Jimmy Carter, so what was the disease? The disease was that incurable disease, of the economy that these devils, had the foothold on in the world, but they were slowly but surely losing their grip because the Most High was bringing them down. Jeremiah 51:7, Babylon hath been a golden cup in the Lord's hand that made all the earth drunken. And that cup is not the charagma. That cup is their philosophies, mainly dealing with democracy, dealing with democracy and pretty much, paying these people money, these different nations, to accept their ways and allow America to go into these different countries. Because pretty much what they did was eventually they stole the resources. It says that made all the earth drunken, right? This is why you see, the degeneration of the world behind the examples of America. You have that's the degeneration of the world behind the examples of America, and the scriptures even speak about Asia, that are partaker with Babylon, So it says, the nations have drunken over wine, therefore the nations are mad, meaning the nations are drunk off of that Babylon juice. They're messed up and they're pissed off because they see that what America so-called promised, the Golden City promised, they didn't come through. Instead, those leaders became rich, but their country was destroyed and exploited by America. Babylon is suddenly fallen and destroyed. How for her take balm for her pain, if so she may be healed? So she cannot be healed because economically, even though they're working on the left-hand side to destroy the economies of the world, to introduce this new global digital system, it's all the Lord doing it. It says, we would have healed Babylon, but she is not healed. Forsake her and let us go every one into his own country. And this is why the nations are going back to their country, not because they're not making money, but because the expenses here to live here and to do business here, or to open businesses and maintain businesses is too expensive. So they're losing money instead of gaining money. So when they go back to their country, it's easier for them, financially to make their products there and ship them to America to make more profit. It says, for her judgment reaches unto heaven and is lifted up even to the skies. Because eventually, once the destruction comes, all of that smoke, and ashes and all that's going to rise. There's going to be a great conflagration in America, which conflagration is just a fancy word of saying a great big fire. All right, so let's go back to the article. It says, in the midst of this economic malaise, which Jimmy Carter later referred to as a crisis of confidence. And why was it a crisis of confidence? Because money that they created, the fiat money, was not really worth anything. But the belief that the people had in it was, what gave it power. Credit means credo, means belief, means faith, means confidence that this paper money had power to get these people whatever they wanted to get. So when Nixon took the dollar off of the silver standard or the gold standard, whichever one it was, what happened was it caused these nations, to not trust the dollar really like that, even though they were still using it, because that was, the way to operate, doing business. And now you see the end results of that, how a lot of these nations are joining the BRICS nation and looking for other, ways to conduct business, to use as a form of money for trade, right? So it says, the United Nations and associated globalists roundtable groups were hard at work developing a scheme to convince the population to embrace global centralization of power. Their goals were rather direct, right? Because overall it's what? A one world government. And the one world government works best when the so-called conspirators and co-conspirators have control and power over the money system. It says, they wanted, it's giving you a bunch of bullet points. It looks like about 10 bullet points. A rationale for government control of human population numbers. Right, this is why they had the Georgia Guidestones, which they recently destroyed, because they pretty much, have that part of the plan already in motion. It says the power to limit industry, which they have. This is why they destroyed the middle class. They destroyed most of the mom and pops and small businesses. It says the next one is the power to control energy production and dictate energy sources. This is why they're trying to get rid of coal, gas and all of that, to bring in the so-called green, that green thing, which that green thing pretty much is dealing with these electrical things that they're pushing out there. Everything being controlled electrically, digitally, so on and so forth. It says the power to control or limit food production and agriculture, which we see everything, as far as food is concerned, being destroyed. Food production being destroyed to create, this monster food that they're making. It says the ability to micromanage individuals' lives in the name of some later defined greater good. Right, the greater good it sounds good in theory, but the greater good depends on who is in charge of dictating what is good and what's not. And they don't have that. This is why it says that when the wicked beareth rule, the people mourn, because they're going to go with what's right for them, what they feel is right. They're not going to go and do the right and just thing based off of the laws of the Lord, because the scriptures say that unto the wicked, the Lord said, what hast thou to do to declare my statutes, or that thou shouldest take my covenants in thy mouth, seeing thou hatest instructions and castest my word behind thee. Next one is a socialized society in which the individual right to property is abandoned. Yeah, this is why it says that they have the power in their hand, to take away fields and covered houses and all of that. You will own nothing and you will be happy, right? It says the next one is it says a one world economic system which they would manage. You see? And that one world economic system is predicated upon what? This digital currency that they're putting together, which eventually will be the micro CHIP. And notice that WEF, which is the World Economic Forum, keeps pushing out what? They keep pushing out, this tracking people subdermally. It says a one world currency system, MOTB, the micro CHIP. That's what they want. One of the guys that attended one of the meetings, he said that one of the dudes showed him the actual currency that they're going to use, the CBDC, and he said it was about this big. And then it says the last one is a one world government managing a handful of separate regions. Right, this is why everything is merging into what? Unions. To make it easier just to grab everything and put it together. Hunger Games. They had the different regions, the 12 regions. And depending on, what status you had, you were in whatever region you were in, you know. Then you had the movie In Time or something like that with Justin Timberlake, and they had regions there. The more time you had on your clock, the more prestigious you were. The less time you had on your clock, the more you were in that rat race trying to get more time so that you could live. And the ones that had the least time were in the worst parts. Since one of the most revealing quotes on the agenda comes from Clinton administration Deputy Secretary of State Strobe Talbot, who stated in Time magazine that in the next century, nations as we know it will be obsolete, see, by one world government. All states will recognize a single global authority. National sovereignty wasn't such a great idea after all, because they want everybody as one. They want everybody sedated. They want everybody obedient. And the ones that are not obedient, the ones that will not be sedated, they want to remove them. It says, to understand how the agenda functions, I offer a quote from Globalist Council on Foreign Relations member Richard Gardner. In an article, Foreign Affairs magazine in 1974, titled The Hard Road to World Order. This is the quote. In short, the House of World Order will have to be built from the bottom up rather than from the top down. It will look like a great booming, buzzing confusion, to use William James' famous description of reality, but an end run around national sovereignty. Eroding it piece by piece will accomplish much more than the old-fashioned frontal assault. Right, because eroding national sovereignty means that the people will no longer be sovereign, will no longer be able to rule themselves, but they will be subjected. Because you have sovereigns, you have subjects. The sovereigns, rule among themselves. They have, the ability to provide for themselves. The subjects do not. The subjects depend on sovereigns. And they don't want sovereigns, they want subjects. In other words, the globalists knew that incrementalism would be the only way to achieve the one world power structure that openly governs, right? And that's why you had, gradualism. Rather than hiding the rule of elitists behind clandestine organizations and puppet politicians, they want a global empire in which they become the anointed philosopher kings. Described in Plato's Republic, their narcissistic ego cannot help but crave the adoration of the masses they secretly hate. And it goes on and on and on. But I'm going to leave it there in the interest of time. I'm going to end it off with the book of Psalms 64. Psalm 64 and 1. I'm going to read a couple of these verses. It says, hear my voice, O Most High, in my prayer. Preserve my life from fear of the enemy. Hide me from the secret counsel of the wicked, from the insurrection of the workers of iniquity. And they've been hard at work. The insurrections of the workers of the insurrection of the workers of iniquity. The insurrection is a cutting into. And what are they going to cut into? Mainly the ones that believe in the Lord, which are what? The Israelites. They're the ones that believe in Yahawah Yahawashi. The Israelites are the biggest threat to the so-called New World Order. This is why there is a blatant, slander campaign, demonization going on of the Israelites, because they know that this is the main obstacle that is thwarting their plans. And they plan on busting right through it. And it's gonna get hairy out here. Matter of fact, cool. I can read a couple more verses. Just bear with me. So it goes on to say, who wet their tongue like a sword and bend their bows to shoot their arrows, even bitter words. And you've seen, just reading off of that article, you know, what they plan on doing. And when I saw that, when I was reading that article earlier, I said, you know what, Lord's will, I could do, you know, a little lesson on it. You know, I would like to have done a full lesson on it, but hey, you got to strike while the iron's hot through the spirit and power of Yahawah by Shem Yahawashi. And those bitter words that this is speaking about is talking about, you know, this new world order that they're putting into place. You know, it says that they may shoot in secret at the perfect. Who are the perfect? The Israelites. This is the whole thing. The whole thing is the destruction, you know, of the nation of Israel, the real Israelites. You know? And people out there don't see this, except for the elect. That they may shoot in secret at the perfect. Suddenly do they shoot at him and fear not, right? Because they're not thinking of, well, you know, I better leave these people alone because the Lord will be mad because they are the Lord's people. No. Because they really believe in their demonic warped heart of hearts that the Most High is with them. But the Most High is not with them. I mean, he's with them to the extent that he's making them do what they do. But as far as being with them as a people, he's not with them as a people, because they are the wicked. It says they encourage themselves in an evil matter. They commune of laying snares privately. They say, who shall see them, right? And they're laying these snares, the snares of what? These different legislations and the plans that they got. And they're doing it privately, meaning in private. It's not something that they're doing openly or outwardly. Then it says they encourage themselves in an evil matter. Yeah, because they pushing each other, egging each other on to get this, you know, this agenda off the ground. This is why once 2020 came in, that was one of their you know, 2000 was one, and then 2020 was the main goal, Agenda 2020. You know, and once that happened, this, you see what took place. And from that point on to now, 2023, 3 years later, you see their plans moving forward even faster. You know, they got a roller coaster ride of things going. And they were, you know, from the reports, they were amazed, you know, that people fell for this thing, you know, with the whole thing that happened and you know, back in 2020. And pretty much, you know, you know, the reason why it prospered and went in is because the Most High made it to prosper and go in. So as they encourage themselves in an evil matter, they commune of laying snares privately. They say, who shall see them? They search out iniquities. They accomplish a diligent search, both the inward thought of every one of them and the heart is deep. You know, because they have these plans that they're not really sharing with anybody but themselves. But people from within, as the scriptures say, will come out and expose them. But the Most High shall shoot at them with an arrow. Suddenly shall they be wounded, right? Because their plans are going to go up in smoke, because the hub of this New World Order plan, or the springboard or the diving board into the New World Order, is going to go up in smoke, which is America. It says, so they shall make their own tongue to fall upon themselves. Right, so they, among themselves, they made their own tongue to fall upon themselves. You know, so in other words, they, you know, people that were a part of it, that learned of the plans, turned on them. It says, all that see them shall flee away. Right, the ones that actually see what's going on are going to flee away from them. But the ones that don't see what's going on are going to head right to it. And the scriptures say that if at all possible, they will deceive the very elect, but they can't deceive the very elect. And it also says that the world wandered after the beast. So when the world wandered after the beast, they were taken by, you know, by all of the plans, the agenda, the New World Order, and so on and so forth. They're caught up in that web, and they can't get out of it. The only ones that are getting out of the web are the elect, you know, of Yahawah by Shem Yahawashi. And all men shall fear and shall declare the work of the Most High, for they shall wisely consider of his doing. Right, that's dealing with the elect. The righteous shall be glad in the Lord and shall trust in him, and all the upright in heart shall glory. Right, so the upright in heart are going to glory, which are what? The elect of the nation of Israel. You know, and these plans that they have are directed at the nation of Israel. So with that, I pray that you brothers and few sisters have been edified. To the next time I say, Shalom.